I never planned to go to war with an HOA. In fact, for most of my life, I deliberately avoided anything with the letters HOA attached to it. Too many rules. Too many bored retirees with clipboards. Too many people who confuse volunteer position with absolute authority. So when I bought my land, I made sure of one thing above all else. Or so I thought. The land I own sits just outside the city limits, 15 acres of mixed-use property that used to be part of a much larger agricultural lease dating back to the 1970s. Back then, a single landowner leased parcels to developers under long-term land lease agreements. Over time, pieces of that land were sold, others were subleased, and some, like mine, were fully purchased outright. At least, that's what my deed said. I had a clean title, a recorded survey, and a property attorney who confirmed everything before I signed. My section was zoned rural residential, independent, and completely separate from the cookie-cutter HOA neighborhood that eventually popped up to the east. That neighborhood was called Willow Ridge Estates. Perfect lawns, identical mailboxes, matching beige houses, and an HOA president who treated her clipboard like a badge. Her name was Karen Whitmore. Yes, really. The first letter arrived 6 months after I moved in. It was tucked into my mailbox without a stamp, folded neatly, and sealed with a bright green sticker that read. I laughed. Actually laughed. I figured someone had made a mistake. I didn't live in Willow Ridge Estates. My driveway didn't even connect to their roads. The only thing we shared was a tree line. Still, I opened it. Dear homeowner, our records indicate that you are delinquent on your Willow Ridge HOA dues for the past 2 quarters. Immediate payment of $860 is required to avoid further action. I reread it twice. Then I checked the address. My address. My name. I shook my head, crumpled the paper, and tossed it in the trash. Big mistake. 2 days later, I heard tires crunching on gravel. I stepped outside and saw a white Lexus SUV creeping up my driveway like it owned the place. It stopped 10 feet from my porch, and out stepped a woman in oversized sunglasses, white sneakers, and a polo shirt embroidered with the words, Willow Ridge HOA. President, she didn't knock. She didn't introduce herself. She just said, you ignored our notice. I blinked. Excuse me? You owe dues, she snapped. And late fees. I crossed my arms. I'm not in your HOA. She scoffed. Everyone in this development is. This isn't your development. She smiled, the kind of tight smile that isn't happy, just confident. Oh, honey, she said. You don't get to decide that. That should have been my warning sign. I invited her to look at my deed. She refused. I don't need to see anything, she said. Our records are clear. So are county records, I replied. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. If you don't pay voluntarily, we'll take legal action. I shrugged. Then you'll lose. Her smile vanished. We'll see. She turned, got back into her Lexus, and peeled out like she'd just won something. I remember thinking, there's no way this woman actually believes she can force me into an HOA. I was wrong. 3 weeks later, I was served. Not a warning. Not another notice. A lawsuit. Karen, on behalf of Willow Ridge Estates HOA, was suing me for. I stared at the paperwork in disbelief. She wasn't bluffing. She actually believed she owned me. My attorney, Mark, read the filing in silence. Then he laughed. Then he stopped laughing. Huh, he said slowly. This is interesting. Interesting how? I asked. Well, he said, flipping through pages, they're claiming your property is part of their master lease. That's impossible. I agree, he said. But they attached something. He slid a yellow document across, and my stomach dropped. Because right there, faint but unmistakable, was my parcel number. Inside a boundary labeled. Mark leaned back. This isn't current, he said. But it explains why they think they own you. I swallowed. They don't, right? He hesitated. Not exactly, he said. But Karen just made a very big mistake. The lease map Karen attached was incomplete. What she didn't realize, what she never bothered to verify, was that the master lease had never been fully dissolved. Some parcels were sold.
Some were released.
But 2 homes in Willow Ridge Estates were still sitting on land technically leased, not owned outright. And according to updated county records, those leases had been consolidated under one controlling landholder. Mark looked at me. That landholder, he said, is you. I felt my pulse in my ears. You're saying, I'm saying, he interrupted, smiling now. Karen didn't just sue the wrong guy. She sued her landlord. Mark slid another document across the table. Parcel ownership records. Highlighted in yellow. Karen Whitmore's address. Under the heading, I sat back, stunned. So let me get this straight, I said slowly. She sued me for HOA dues on land she doesn't legally own? Mark nodded. And by filing this lawsuit, he added, she's officially acknowledged the lease. I couldn't help it. I smiled. For the first time since this started, I smiled. Because Karen had just opened a door she could never close. And I was about to walk straight through it. Karen Whitmore had no idea what she had just done. From her perspective, this was a routine intimidation play. File a lawsuit, scare a non-compliant homeowner, collect dues, and move on. She had done it before. According to Mark, Willow Ridge HOA averaged 3 lawsuits a year, most of them settled quickly by people who didn't have the time, money, or patience to fight. But Karen had finally picked the wrong target. And worse, she had handed me the legal rope to hang her own case with. A week after the lawsuit was filed, Karen sent another letter. This one came certified. Due to your continued refusal to comply, the HOA will be pursuing maximum damages. Failure to settle within 10 days may result in liens, foreclosure proceedings, and seizure of property assets. Mark read it aloud and shook his head. She's getting aggressive, he said. She has no idea, I replied. No, he agreed. She doesn't. What Karen didn't know was that Mark had already filed a counterclaim, quietly, carefully, and attached were updated county surveys, lease consolidation documents, historical land records, and one very uncomfortable exhibit labeled, current structures built on leased land without controller consent. That exhibit listed 2 addresses. One belonged to the HOA treasurer. The other was Karen Whitmore's house. Discovery is where arrogance goes to die. Karen's attorney, clearly not the same one who filed the lawsuit, started asking questions. Uncomfortable questions. Questions like, can you provide proof of fee simple ownership? Can you explain why lease termination documents are missing? When did the HOA verify land title boundaries? Karen answered none of them personally. She delegated everything. Bad move. Because when her attorney requested full land documentation, the HOA came up empty. No release agreements.
No ownership transfers. No termination filings.
Just assumptions. And assumptions don't hold up in court. A neighbor who didn't like Karen tipped me off later. Apparently, the HOA board called an emergency meeting after receiving Mark's counterclaim. Karen reportedly slammed the paperwork onto the table and shouted, "This is a scare tactic." The treasurer wasn't so sure. "Karen," he said, "why does this say our homes are on leased land?" She waved it off. Old maps. Outdated records. He's bluffing. But then the secretary spoke up. "I checked the county portal," she said quietly. "It's not outdated." That's when the room went silent. For the first time since becoming HOA president, Karen did something she should have done from the beginning. She looked. She pulled her property file, her deed, her title insurance. And there it was, buried in fine print she'd never read. Ownership of structure only. Land governed by consolidated lease. She stared at it. Read it again. Then again. And for the first time, reality cracked through her confidence. Karen scheduled an emergency meeting with her attorney. She expected reassurance. She got the opposite. "I need you to understand something," he said carefully. "You don't own the land your house sits on." "That's impossible," she snapped. "It's not," he replied. "You own the building, not the soil." She laughed nervously. "So what? Everyone else is the same." He shook his head. "No. Most parcels were released. Yours wasn't." "And the plaintiff?" she asked. "That would be," he paused. Your landlord. The word hit her like a slap. Landlord, she whispered. Yes, he said. And you sued him. 2 days later, I got a call. Unknown number. I answered. Hello. Her voice was different now. Less sharp. Less confident. This is Karen Whitmore, she said. President of Willow Ridge HOA. I know who you are. A pause. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I smiled. No, I said calmly. There hasn't. Well, she continued, forcing politeness, perhaps we can resolve this without further legal action. You already chose legal action. By the time the second filing hit the county docket, Willow Ridge Estates was no longer a peaceful neighborhood. It was a pressure cooker. And Karen Whitmore was standing in the middle of it, pretending the temperature wasn't rising. HOA neighborhoods thrive on gossip. And nothing spreads faster than fear mixed with legal language. It started small. One homeowner asked the treasurer why the HOA suddenly needed an emergency legal reserve. Another noticed that Karen stopped responding to emails. Someone else overheard the word lease during a phone call in the clubhouse. Within days, the whispers turned into questions. And the questions turned into anger. Because buried in Mark's filing, available to anyone who bothered to read it, was one trust her with that kind of risk. Karen scheduled a town hall meeting. Not because she wanted to, because she had no choice. Over 70 residents packed into the clubhouse that night, far more than usual. Folding chairs were dragged in from storage. People stood against the walls. Arms crossed. Voices low. Karen stood at the front with a fake smile and a printed agenda no one cared about. Let's remain calm, she began. There is a lot of misinformation circulating. Are our houses on leased land? Someone shouted. The room went silent. Karen swallowed. There are historical land agreements, she said carefully. That's not an answer. Another voice snapped. The treasurer shifted uncomfortably. Then the secretary spoke, the same one who'd checked the county records.
Yes, she said.
Some homes are. A wave of noise exploded. Why didn't we know? Is this why taxes are weird? Can he evict us? Did you know about this? Karen raised her hands. This has nothing to do with eviction, she said too quickly. And no one is losing their home. Then why did you sue him? Someone yelled. That landed like a punch. Karen's face went red. He refused to pay HOA dues, she snapped. He was undermining the community. A man in the back stood up. You sued our landlord? Silence. Karen stared at him. He's not. He is, the secretary interrupted softly. I checked. The room turned. Every eye on Karen. Every ounce of trust draining away. HOA bylaws are funny things. Karen had used them like weapons for years. Tonight, they turned on her. Someone motioned for a vote of temporary suspension of presidential authority. Karen laughed. You can't be serious. The treasurer didn't laugh. According to section 4.3, he said, we can. Hands went up. Fast. Overwhelmingly. Karen stood frozen as her gavel, her precious symbol of control, was taken from her hands. She was no longer speaking for the HOA. She was just another homeowner. The courtroom was smaller than Karen expected.
No dramatic benches.
No grand gestures. Just a judge with tired eyes and zero patience for nonsense. Karen sat stiffly beside her attorney. I sat calmly with Mark. The judge flipped through the filings. Ms. Whitmore, he said, you filed this lawsuit claiming authority over the defendant's property. Yes, she replied confidently. Based on what? She hesitated. Our HOA jurisdiction. The judge raised an eyebrow. Jurisdiction over land you don't own? Karen's lawyer cleared his throat. Your Honor. The judge held up a hand. I've read the counterclaim, he said. And the lease documents. He looked directly at Karen. Did you know the defendant was the consolidated lease controller? Her mouth opened. Closed. No, she whispered. The judge leaned back. Then why are we here? Mark stood. Your Honor, he said, this case represents not just wrongful litigation, but reckless abuse of authority. He gestured toward Karen. She attempted to impose dues, threaten foreclosure, and seize property rights she never possessed. The judge nodded slowly. And in doing so, he said, she acknowledged a lease she now claims ignorance of. Karen looked pale. The judge sighed. This court does not look kindly on weaponized ignorance. He glanced at Karen again, especially from someone in a leadership position. The judge turned to Mark. Mr. Harris, he said, does your client intend to enforce the lease? The room held its breath. Karen turned toward me. Her eyes were wide, afraid. Mark looked at me. I stood. Not yet, I said calmly, but I reserve the right. Karen's shoulders sagged, because she finally understood something crucial. This wasn't about HOA dues anymore. This was about power, and she had none. Hailed sharply. You don't need to make this difficult. I laughed. You sued me. Silence. Then, quietly, what do you want? I want you to withdraw the lawsuit, I said, publicly, and acknowledge that I'm not part of your HOA. She hesitated. And compensate me for legal fees. Her tone hardened. That's unreasonable. I leaned back. Karen, I said, you live on my land. Dead silence. I suggest you talk to your lawyer. Click. Karen didn't withdraw. She doubled down. So Mark filed another motion, this one enforcing lease compliance. It demanded. Karen Whitmore didn't sleep that night. I know this because, according to one of her former board members, her porch light stayed on until sunrise, and because fear has a way of keeping people wide awake when they finally realize control was just an illusion. For years, Karen ruled Willow Ridge Estates with fines, threats, and intimidation. Clipboards and bylaws were her weapons. And she believed, truly believed, that authority came from volume and confidence alone. The court was about to teach her otherwise. When the judge returned to the bench, the courtroom went silent. He adjusted his glasses, glanced once more at the filings, and then spoke, slowly, clearly, and without mercy. This court finds that the plaintiff, Willow Ridge Estates HOA, acted without jurisdiction, without verification, and without legal authority. Karen stared straight ahead. The defendant, the judge continued, is not a member of the HOA and never has been. A pause. The lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. Mark squeezed my arm. But the judge wasn't done. Furthermore, he said, turning his gaze directly to Karen, this court finds evidence of harassment, intimidation, and misuse of civil process. Karen's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Legal fees, the judge said, are awarded to the defendant. Karen's head dropped. And, the judge added, any further attempt by the HOA or its former president to impose dues, penalties, or enforcement on the defendant will be treated as contempt. He closed the file. Court is adjourned. Outside the courtroom, Karen finally cracked. This isn't fair, she said, her voice shaking. He's abusing a technicality. The judge stopped walking. Turned. Ms. Whitmore, he said calmly, property law is not a technicality. He looked her straight in the eye. It's reality. And with that, he walked away. Karen stood there, defeated, exposed, and suddenly very small. Within a week, Willow Ridge Estates HOA issued a formal apology letter. Not signed by Karen. She had been removed permanently. The letter acknowledged improper enforcement failure to verify land ownership misuse of HOA authority. It also quietly mentioned something else. Translation? They were terrified. Because they now knew exactly what Karen had ignored for years. Karen didn't just lose her presidency. She lost credibility. Neighbors stopped waving. Board members avoided her. The clubhouse door stayed closed when she passed. And worst of all, she had to face the one truth she couldn't bully away. She lived on land she didn't own. Every month, every step, every time she looked out her window, she knew. A month later, Karen's attorney requested a private meeting. We met in a neutral office. Karen didn't speak much. She didn't interrupt. She didn't posture. She just listened. Mark laid out the lease terms, calmly, professionally. Just updated compliance, modest ground rent adjustments, and one key clause, Karen signed. Her hands shook slightly as she did. As she stood to leave, she paused. I thought being HOA president meant control, she said quietly. I thought it meant power. I looked at her. I said, it just meant responsibility. She nodded and walked out. Willow Ridge Estates is quieter now. The HOA still exists, but barely. People remember what happened. They remember how close they came to losing everything because one person didn't bother to check facts before swinging authority around like a weapon. As for me, and every time I see someone waving a clipboard like it makes them important, I remember one simple truth.